Hello students, uh, let us look at chapter number 8 part 2. So let us look at nuclear arms race and escalation that began in 1953 to 1962. So all this came up due to changes that happened in political leadership, and this made the Cold War very dynamic. So during the last 18 months of Truman administration, the American uh, realized that its budget had quadrupled, and Eisenhower moved to reduce military spending by a third while continuing to fight the Cold War effectively. So Nikita Khrushchev eventually won the ensuing power struggle by the mid 1950s. And also in 1956, he denounced Joseph Stalin, who had died in 1953, and proceeded to ease controls over the party and society. So let us look at how Hungarian Revolution impacted the Warsaw Pact. So after the death of Joseph Stalin in 1953, the tensions in Europe slightly relaxed. So the Soviets, who had already created a network of mutual assistance treaties in Eastern Bloc by 1949, established a formal alliance there in the Warsaw Pact in 1955, and it stood opposed to NATO. So the Hungarian Revolution of 1956 occurred shortly after Khrushchev arranged the removal of Hungary's Stalist leader Matthias Rákosi. So in response to a popular anti-communist uprising, the new regime formally disbanded the secret police. Also, it declared its intentions to withdraw from the Warsaw Pact and pledged to reestablish free elections. So here, the Soviet army invaded, and thousands of Hungarians were killed and arrested. Also, it imprisoned and deported the Soviet Union, and approximately 200,000 Hungarians fled Hungary. So also let us look at Rapaki Plan and Berlin crisis of 1958 to 1959. So in 1957, Polish Foreign Minister Adam Rapaki proposed the Rapaki Plan for a nuclear-free zone in Central Europe. So public opinion tended to be favorable in the West, but it was rejected by the leaders of West Germany, Britain, France, and the US. So, because they feared it would leave the powerful convention armies of the Warsaw Pact dominant over the weaker NATO armies. So, during November in 1958, Khrushchev made a successful attempt to turn all Berlin into an independent and demilitarized free city. So he gave the US, Great Britain, and France a 6 month ultimatum to withdraw their troops from the sectors of West Berlin, or he would transfer control of western access routes to the East Germans. So Khrushchev earlier explained to Mao Zedong that Berlin is the testicles of the West. So every time I want to make the West scream, I squeeze on Berlin. So that's what he told Mao Zedong. So NATO formally rejected the ultimatum in the mid-December, and Khrushchev withdrew in return for a Geneva conference on the German question. So let us look at American military build-up during the Cold War. So like Truman and the Eisenhower, John F. Kennedy supported containment. So also President Eisenhower's new look policy had emphasized the use of less expensive nuclear weapons to deter Soviet aggression by threatening massive nuclear attacks on all the Soviet Union. So these nuclear weapons were much cheaper than maintaining a large standing army. So Eisenhower cut conventional forces to save money. So also, Kennedy went ahead and implemented a new strategy known as flexible response. So this strategy relied on conventional arms to achieve limited goals. And as part of this policy, Kennedy expanded the U.S. Special Operations Forces elite military units that could fight unconventionally in various conflicts. Also, Kennedy hoped that the flexible response strategy would allow the US to counter Soviet influence without resorting to a nuclear war. So let us look at competition in the third world. So the nationalist movements in some countries and regions, for example Indonesia and Indochina, were often allied with communist groups, or otherwise they were perceived to be unfriendly to the Western interests. So in this context, the US and the Soviet Union increasingly competed for influence by proxy in the third world as decolonization gained momentum in the 1950s and the early 1960s. So by then, both sides were selling armaments to gain influence. So let us look at the space race during Cold War. So on the nuclear weapons side, the US and the Soviet Union pursued nuclear armament and developed long-range weapons, and with these weapons, they could strike the territory of the other. So in August 1957, the Soviets successfully launched the world's first intercontinental ballistic missile and also went ahead and launched their first Earth satellite Sputnik 1, and this led to what they called Sputnik crisis. So the CIA described the orbit of Sputnik 1 as a stupendous scientific achievement and concluded that the Soviet Union had likely perfected an international ballistic missile capable of reaching any desired target with accuracy. So, the launch of Sputnik by the Soviets inaugurated the space race, and also this led to a series of historic space exploration milestones, and most notably was the Apollo moon landing from 1969 by the US. So also, this was described as Cold War by Frank Borman, the astronaut. So the Soviet government limited the release of information about the lunar landing, which affected this reaction and made a mixed reaction in public. So a portion of the populace did not give it any attention, but another portion was angered. So a major Cold War element of the race of space race was the satellite reconnaissance, as well as signals intelligence to gauge which aspects of the space programs had military capabilities. So also let us look at Vietnam War during this period. So under President John F. Kennedy, the US troop levels in Vietnam grew from just 1,000 in 1959 to 16,000 in 1963. So this was a result of uh, Vietnamese President heavy-handed crackdown on Buddhist monks in 1963, and this led the US to endorse a deadly military coup against him. So the war escalated further in 1964 following the controversial uh, uh, Gulf of Tonkin incident in which the US destroyer was alleged to have clashed with North Vietnamese first attack craft. So the Gulf of Tonkin resolution gave President Lyndon Johnson a broad authorization to increase U.S. military presence and deploying ground combat units for the first time and increasing troop levels to 184,000. So let us look at nuclear testing and use of outer space treaties. So the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty was signed on August 5th, 1963 by the US and the Soviet Union and over 100 other nations. So this treaty banned nuclear weapons tests in the atmosphere, outer space and underwater, restricting such tests to underground environments. So this treaty also followed heightened concerns over the militarization of space, amplified by the US's Starfish Prime test in 1962, which involved the detonation of a nuclear device in the upper atmosphere. So I have attached the reading materials for this chapter. Should you want to discover more and make more research, you can use these materials. That's all for now. Thank you.